around the rest of the country will be looking and saying, well, these people have already received the settlement.
I want to turn to an interview I did with one of the sick 9/11 workers. Joe Picoro was an iron worker from New Jersey. He was 34 years old when he worked at Ground Zero after 9/11. He died last month from his illnesses. I spoke to Joe by phone on September 11th, 2009.
And, you know, like my doctor said, I have the lungs of a 95-year-old man. Now, you know, where she said about age, you know, we're aging, and our bodies are aging way before they're supposed to, you know. And like I said, the doctor gave me a year or so to live, you know, and a year or two to live. And you know, that's you know, we need to get this straight. We need to straighten this out. We need to get the funding. We need to get the James Droga bill passed. You know, I mean, I've been saying this for year after year. So is Mrs. Maloney and also Mr. Molina, that it has to be passed. And yet it never seems to make it. It never seems to get passed. And I don't understand why. I don't know. I mean, we were there for them when they needed us, and, you know, they told us that Christine Whitman stood there, and I don't care what she says about, she said the pile was different. She's a liar. I was standing there. She did not say that the air was different on the pile. She stood on the pile with her mask below her neck and talked to us and told us we were heroes and said the air was fine, and she put the mask back on, and she got back in her car and she left, you know, and went back to New Jersey where it was safe. So she's a liar, and that's all she is.
That was Joe Picoro speaking, September 11, 2009, diagnosed with a respiratory illness in 2004. That was a result of breathing in poisonous fumes at Ground Zero. Your assessment of Christy Todd Whitman, who was the head of the EPA at the time, telling people immediately to go back to work very soon after the attacks, that all was safe.
Yeah. Her statements were actually vetted by the White House. And so I had a chance, as I was working on the book, to look at her original statements and then the statements as they were modified by the White House. And it was clear that there was a message that the administration was trying to get across. And it was implemented through her statements, which was basically, if there's any danger, it's minor, we need to get back to work. And so she played her role in that, and unfortunately, for an agency that's very good, the EPA is very good at giving out warnings on ozone alert day, you know, where they will tell people if you're pregnant, if you're elderly, children shouldn't be outside. In this case, they gave an incredibly general statement that was misunderstood. You can only assume that it was deliberate.
Juan isn't with us today, but he was doing a lot of that first reporting. In October 26, 2001, in a Daily News front-page story headlined "A Toxic Nightmare at Disaster Site," he reported that hundreds of tests conducted by the EPA revealed far more elevated levels of toxic pollutants in the air and dust in lower Manhattan than the public had been told. It was a shocking story that was immediately attacked by top officials and then Mayor Rudolph Giuliani's administration. Juan was under enormous pressure for what he wrote, but he didn't back down. Also report about the level of asbestos downtown Manhattan.
Sure. You know, one of the lessons of this that I think we need to keep in mind, and in case or whenever something like this happens again, is that at the very beginning, the dust was visible to everyone. Right? Everyone who saw it understood that this can't possibly be good. We knew about asbestos in those buildings because the construction was only in the 1970s. People knew that there was asbestos up to the 40th floor. With the focus on asbestos, which the effect of asbestos on the human body takes years or decades, what was overlooked was that most of the dust was made of silica from the super hard concrete that was basically pulverized when the building came down. The effects of breathing in basically gaseous concrete was much more immediate than the long-term problem. As a result of that, we weren't focused on the kinds of things that might have prevented some of the pulmonary and respiratory problems, because people were breathing in this stuff that had a pH value that was so high, it was basically Drano. Now, if Christy Whitman, instead of saying the air is safe to breathe, came out and said, look, you need to wear a mask because there's Drano in the air, and if you breathe this, it's going to affect your insides as though you were swallowing Drano, I think the message would have been quite different. So we have to keep in mind that while there are lots of problems, the acute ones, the ones that are easiest to take care of and are most immediately going to affect the largest number of people, can't simply be ignored. We didn't hear anything about pH and this high toxicity of the silica for months, and by then it was much too late.
You wrote City of Dust, Illness, Arrogance, and 9/11. Go further into the arrogance. The
arrogance. You know, New York City is an incredible place, and it does things here that no other city could do. And the ordinary things here, just like zoning and fire protection, are extraordinary by the simple scale and scope of it. But there comes a moment when you have to realize your limitations, and I think at the very beginning, the Giuliani administration can be found guilty of a certain arrogance by claiming that they had the capability and the wherewithal to take care of this problem without outside help. It's hard to understand today because of what we know about the illnesses, but at the time, there were no public health officials who were actually in charge of the cleanup. The cleanup was under the control of construction people who do a great job putting up buildings, and they do an okay job taking down buildings, and they can keep you safe from a falling girder, but they don't work with hazardous material. The people who were trained to do that basically were not involved. So there was a certain arrogance about the way things were handled that I think has long-term consequences.
And the press very much a part of the establishment in New York, wanting it to return to health. Do you think your paper, The Times, was also guilty of accepting the official statements at the beginning?
I wish that somebody, now at that time I was on the international business desk, so I wasn't really involved in the story, but I wish someone from the paper had asked Christy Whitman on that day when she made the statement that Pecuro was talking about, where she said the air is safe to breathe, had stopped her, and instead of sighing with relief that things were not so bad, because remember at the time we were all shocked and hoping for good news, even if it didn't make sense. If someone had just stopped her and said, wait a minute, this air is safe to breathe where? The air is safe to breathe when? The air is safe to breathe for everyone? Or just, and that didn't happen. And I think that led to kind of a misunderstanding. The City of Dust, the dust becomes a metaphor because after those statements come out and then the other side, like Juan Gonzalez and Joel Kufferman, who were doing a great job telling people what the dangers are, the rest of the people in New York are left without the ability to believe anyone. So their trust crumbled just the way the towers crumbled. And then once that happens, it's difficult to get them to believe anything. And so here we are, 9 years later, litigation is just barely creeping along. Legislation still hasn't been passed. Thousands of people out there sick, and thousands more. This is the worst part. Because we haven't settled any of these questions, thousands and thousands more worried every day when they hear about someone who died that they may be next. It's a horrible way to live.
Well, Anthony DePalma, I want to thank you for being with us. His book is called City of Dust, Illness, Arrogance, and 9/11. He wrote for the New York Times for 22 years, now a writer in residence at Seton Hall University. And it just reminds me again to renew my call for Juan Gonzalez to be included in that Pulitzer that the New York Daily News won, because he, before all of his colleagues at the Daily News, let alone all the mainstream press in New York, was pursuing the story in those days after 9/11. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the